Hey everyone, welcome. This is going to be the first of hopefully a couple conversations, and some of the first videos I've done on my channel in quite a while. My name's David Wolcott. I'm a Christian apologist. I love books, and I love discussing truth with people. I love talking about why is it that we believe what we believe. Why are certain beliefs held by individuals or by the population? How they came about, all that type of stuff. And I'm here with my first guest on the channel, I think, uh, known as the Faithiest Atheist. I first met him, I think it was about 2 years ago. I'd seen this random channel pop up, start popping up in different groups, this random Facebook page, and I was like, okay, this is, a little weird, trying to, test the water, seeing what's going on. And then suddenly I see all these pictures with him and all of these apologetics conferences, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's an atheist that's going to more apologetics conferences than I am. What's going on? And so we ended up reaching out at some point and talking with each other, and we've become pretty good friends since. And happy to have you on. And yeah, please tell us a little bit about yourself or whatever you want to share, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Okay, yeah, sure. And I'll make it real quick. Yes, my name is Richard. I do go by the Faithiest Atheist. I have a Facebook channel, and that's really it. I do have a YouTube channel, but it's sort of pathetic, and I need to get working on that. At some point,
Same
I
here.
realize, yeah, I realize video and video clips and TikTok is the future. I just right now won't do that. But I'm on Facebook, and I'm doing okay on Facebook. I would say for the past 5 years now. I've been the kind of atheist where I've tried to interact with Christians and Christian apologists without screaming and yelling, and just assuming that it's all bunk. Of course, I was raised Christian, so I speak the language. I was raised Southern Baptist, so I still kind of present myself as a Southern Baptist when you're talking to me. And even now, I'll go to church, not just apologetics conferences. I'll go to church, and people will just assume I'm a member of the church because I understand how churches work, and you wouldn't pick me out as an atheist just to hear me
Yeah.
talk. I've been doing that maybe for 5 years now. My first apologetics conference was in 2019 with Frank Turek, and I got to spend some time with him.
Okay.
Uh, Been doing that ever since. Here it is, 2024. Um, just came back from apologetics conference with Leighton Flowers and Eric Hernandez. And tomorrow I'm going to debate at Arizona State University against Ratio Christi, the director of the Ratio Christi chapter at Arizona State University. So that's
Ooh,
going to
that's
be,
awesome.
yeah, and that'll be televised on my page. So anybody who goes to my page on Facebook tomorrow at 2:45 Eastern Standard Time, check my channel, and we're going to begin live streaming that debate.
Awesome. I'll definitely add that link in the show notes.
Great.
And I am speaking on behalf of all apologists here, I think, and saying thank you for the civility. And
Sure.
I know you have a great sense of humor, especially on Facebook. And, I know we like, poking fun at each other at different times, but sincerely, my predominant early apologetics experience was dealing with new atheists
Yeah.
who are usually less than civil.
Right.
And I want to say most apologists have that either same background or even that maybe their dominant field today. And so it is refreshing to meet someone who does disagree with this, but respects the fact that, hey, guess what? We're still human, and
Right.
maybe we have good reasons for our beliefs, and a lot of Christians don't have good reasons. But I'm working on that end. Uh,
Right.
so yeah, so today's conversation is freedom. I'm calling it freedom to believe, responsibility to believe well. And I've said in a couple of my interviews over the last year or two, and I'll reiterate today that even more so than the truth of Christianity, there's a couple things that I believe that kind of ground everything, which is one, everyone has the freedom to believe. And I mean freedom to believe whatever they want. I do not want any kind of like thought control or belief control of any kind. I want everyone to have the freedom to believe whatever they want. But having that freedom doesn't mean they're free from the consequences of their beliefs. Reality is still a thing, and they may like the consequences, they may not like the consequences. That's something they'll have to decide. But the fact that we all believe something doesn't mean that, like, there will be consequences for those beliefs. And so, because of that, I believe that we have a moral responsibility to believe well. And I'll use a completely non-religious one example that I've never tested out before, so I may completely mess this one up, but I'm going to use drunk driving as an example. I do believe someone should have the right to believe that they can drive safely while they're drunk. However, the reality is they probably will not. And the fact that they believe they can doesn't protect them from any consequences that happen if they do go drunk driving. Which means I believe that everyone has the moral responsibility to decide, okay, I have this belief about my driving skills, and here's the consequences if I'm wrong, and here's the likelihood that I'm wrong. And so maybe I shouldn't act on those beliefs because if I'm wrong, and I probably am, there's a problem. And maybe I should change my beliefs if they're that far off from reality. Using a religious example, I currently believe that Islam is wrong. I'm open to the idea, to the possibility, the reality that it could be right, and I acknowledge that if I'm wrong about Islam, that means I'm going to face consequences for believing things that are sin according to Islam, and I understand that and I accept that. But I do believe we should all have the freedom to believe what we want about those situations. So having said that, what do you think about that? I know, like we've mentioned, you're respectful of the fact that obviously respectful of the fact that we do disagree with each other theologically, but you're able to have that disagreement and you're able to have that, that friendship while being civil. So what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on how we can engage better and in a more healthy way?
Yeah, I do have strong thoughts on this, and I'm going to start off with my coming to Jesus moment as an atheist.
Love it. Finally.
So here was my coming to Jesus moment. I've been working in the counterterrorism field now for almost 30 years as a Marine, and then also with various agencies. And I won't say which that I'm with. And the only reason I'm doing that is not because I'm a super secret guy. If you ever meet somebody who's working on a super secret thing that they can't ever talk about, they'll have some other story and they'll carry themselves in
Hmm.
some way you'll never even imagine that they actually work. So I work in that field, and the only reason I don't name the place that I work for is that if I were to say something about Hezbollah or something, then somebody might say, "Oh, well, an official from so and so believes this, and so this is how the agency sees that." So I'm not going to associate myself with the agency that I work for now,
Fair
but
enough.
I just have been working in that field. And what I discovered over decades of reading terrorists is how fervently they believe it, and then how fervently they want to get rid of people who don't agree with their ideology or their concept. And it's not
Hmm.
always religion. You know, we've seen in the news the dominant groups who have conducted attacks. But if you just look at all the people who are just angry, and in order to get on our desks, you have to show the intent and the capability of killing other people specifically because they're not part of your group. And you're in your view, you're like, the world's going to be a lot better if it's just us, and then everyone else is sort of a filth, or they're a disease, or you know, they're like a something you have to disinfect. And so they no longer think of those as people. And I see so much of that, and I see so much uh, accusing other people and just assuming that other people aren't humans, that I began to say, man, there's got to be another way to interact. We can't just have people doing this. So I sort of dedicated myself to not being that way. And so at the time I wasn't a Christian, I was an atheist. And at the time I was thinking, if you're Christian, you've just been sort of, they kind of caught you when you were young, and you know, now you're kind of caught up. That was my take way back then. And then I said, I'm just not going to have that approach anymore. I'm not going to, because I see too many atheists who are talking like terrorists. They're not terrorists, but they're saying these are all filth and they need to be gone.
Yeah.
What's wrong with them? They need to get wiped away. And then I've seen, you know, Christians, Muslims, and you know, in our job, if someone's Hindu and they're speaking that way, then you know, we include them too. If
Hmm.
whatever religion or ideology or concept, and it's not always religion in this world, but anybody like that who's talking like that, I just said, I can't talk like that anymore. So then I got into my academic career, is just the neurology of how that happens. Why do people why do people embrace concepts like this? You know, why does Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, why does that take hold? And what is it about that way of thinking where people, keep believing things? And then why does sometimes they get so angry? You know, why can some groups live together and some can't? So I got into that neurology, and I really became inspired by any group that said, we're going to hold tight to our standards, but we're also going to assume that the people around us are also human beings and worthy of existing, and we're going to try to work it out with them. And I just began to get inspired by people who thought like that. And I just said, I'm just going to be that kind of person. Whether one of these religions are true or no religion is true, I'm just going to be that kind of person. And then with that mindset, I ended up making friends who are Muslims, who are just very friendly and outgoing. And if you force scripture in their face, you know, your Quran says this, they're going to be like, I don't know what to make of that. But you know, I'm never going to do that. And you know, same thing with any other religion. If there's verses that seem to be not like that, I've got Christian and Islamic friends who say, okay, it says that, but that's not instructions for me now, and I would never recommend that for other people. And I've just found there's so many people are like that. There's so many non-terrorists and so many people who just refuse to think of others as not humans. But then there's enough who do. There's enough who do
Yeah.
think that way. And so I decided I'm just going to make my page about not doing that and going the other way. More so than atheism versus Christianity. It's just less vitriol. So that was my coming to Jesus moment.
Well, that's awesome. And I actually think that's a really and I'm looking something up because your description of how you identified the I'll just go ahead and call it the terrorist mindset for now. I don't know if there's a formal like psychological term for it. Um, I love that principle of if we think we have to get rid of the other person, what's different between us and a terrorist?
Right.
If we think there's only one way, and it's the one of the reasons why it struck me is, and I'm not going to throw names on this one, but I read a progressive Christian book a couple years ago that legit, it was two authors, and they were legit talking, and the context of the book was pseudo lighthearted, like not comedy lighthearted, but like informal discussion.
Right.
But they legit talked about wanting to ship conservatives off planet until they've been indoctrinated through like NPR and a couple other things, and then maybe they'll be allowed back on the planet.
Yeah, that kind of thinking is the kind of thing I try to fight. Um,
Okay, I like that. I need to get with you about book recommendations on how to study that because I've also got a I'm starting to call it a cult because it's checking off the boxes. And one of the descriptions that or one of the key red flags that I've seen in it is a refusal to question the leader.
that's a huge
Um,
part of it.
yeah, is
And again, that's the neurology. You don't even have to be a terrorist. You can just
mhm,
be human. I think one of the ways, one of the things I'm going to talk about, and of course I'm an atheist, and so I'm going to be all evolution this, evolution that. But that's our religion.
right?
Um, I'm going to post that our brains did not evolve for facts. Our brains
Mhm,
evolved to collaborate. Because if we don't collaborate, we will get wiped out. We are not the strongest primate. If you dropped five of the greatest humans on an island with five of the least qualified chimpanzees, the chimpanzees are still going to be there, and the humans aren't going to make it. The five, great humans will not
mhm.
make it, and the five chimpanzees will because they're more accustomed biologically to living in the natural
Yeah,
world. And we're not. We're now biologically acclimated to living in society. I'm sure there's a few hard ass people out there that would fight this, but we're not the strongest primate. We're
yeah,
our
no,
secret.
yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna say our secret is in our teamwork, and so our brains evolved to do teamwork, and so that's why I think you can have people believe in the craziest things, but as long as they feel a bond with other people, then their brain starts thinking alongside of that group thinking. It's sort of like a group think, except it's a survival technique. It's not. I hate to say it's a weakness. Intellectually, it might be a weakness, but survival wise, it could be a strength because
Yeah.
that group will take care of each other.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously I question evolution, but so I would question whether our brains were designed for facts over strictly survival, but that doesn't change the reality of what we see,
Right.
which is very much people are willing to put facts completely aside
Yeah.
if it means some form of survival.
Yeah.
And I also think you're right with society has developed to the point where we don't think in terms of it. Well, there's an old Chinese proverb of if you want to, I'm going to butcher this completely, but it's something like if you want to prepare for tomorrow, um, then like plant rice. If you want to prepare for 10 years, plant trees. If you want to prepare for 100 years, educate children.
Yeah.
In today's society, especially in the West, we're legitimately privileged enough that we don't have to worry about tomorrow or next week or next month.
Right.
Um, and because of that, we don't have a mindset for, okay, what do we need to do in order to ensure that our children's children will be in a healthy environment?
Right.
And that's partly why I push back within on the Christian side. Like I'm a young Earth creationist. I sincerely, for reasons we're not going to get into, believe that
Yes.
when that
You're a myth. I'll be darned. I thought you guys were a myth.
we- well, so okay, so I believe it, but there are other young Earth creationists who will fight tooth and nail for if you don't believe young Earth creationism, you're a horrible heretic. You know, you're straight going to hell because you don't believe this. And I'm like,
Right.
that's not helpful.
Mm-mm.
It's not like my standard in terms of theology. I go back to, okay, the early Christian creeds, both in scripture and out of scripture, not one of them mentions the age of the earth.
Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is, because it's a question of reality, it is important. But clearly, there's a gradient of what's important,
Yeah.
and I don't find that on the important thing. And
Right.
I agree with you on the island. These days, you could take five of the best. Like you'd have to take like five Bear Grylls and
Yeah.
put them on the island, and they might have a chance.
Right.
Um, but if not, then on a natural level, they're not going to survive. And frankly, the way Western society is, even our community wouldn't be able to survive that because we're at this point we're so divided generally that you'd have to pick five people from the exact same belief group,
Right.
give them a week, and you'll have five different belief groups.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I've always said if you're gonna do something like that, it would probably take about 10,000 people, and they'd have to be carefully selected. That some people know how to find a river and do irrigation and do some city planning,
Hmm.
and then they're going to need a security team to make sure they're not killed for believing the wrong things. And you'd need some heavy security. But with 10,000 people, we could dominate any other primates. Take 10,000 of any other primates, and then take 10,000 of
Hmm.
us, and we would have those other primates in zoos in short order, and we'd have a city. But it would take about 10,000 of us to do that.
Yeah, I don't know about the numbers, but it makes sense. As if you get um yeah, enough of us because of our ability to manipulate tools and to we can work proactively,
Yeah.
but you'd also have to pick um you wouldn't be able to just do a random lottery.
Right. Right. It would have to be
You'd
very.
have to pick, yeah. Um, oh man, oh, I'm so glad you have that. I can't get away from that terrorist background of
And
um
And the thing is that you don't have to be a terrorist to have that mindset. And I see people with the
yeah.
terrorist mindset, and I'm not accusing them of being a terrorist, but I'm like, you're in danger of just. And here's another thing: is it's addictive, because it feels like righteousness, and if you feel like you're righteous, man, you could carry that for the rest of your life. And I've known Christians and I know atheists who feel righteous, and they wouldn't kill anybody if you gave them a gun and said, okay, let's get serious about what you're saying. Here's the gun, let's go kill them. I swear they would drop it and call the cops, because then the fantasy's over. So there's sort of like a mental fantasy that's addictive, but they would
Keyboard
not go
warrior.
right. But it's still scary, and kids don't know any better. So like, I've got two teenage girls, and right now I think I've exposed them to enough groups that you can't tell them that any group is the good guys and any group is the bad guys. I think they're kind of like what I'm at, is that someone could introduce them as anything. Someone could say, I'm a Christian, I'm a Mormon, I'm a Muslim, I'm an atheist. And at that point, my daughters would say, you've told me nothing about yourself. I've got to see how you interact with other people, how you think about other people, how you think about families. So I hope I've trained them to at least get to that point.
Oh, I can speak to my own end on that. I was raised in the church. I was always, always went to church, always went to either private Christian schools or homeschooled. And my mom was, I'm not going to say she was a devotee of James Dobson, but he was the only parenting influence that I know of. When
His
Billy Graham was, huh?
his books are, I've heard things about him, but the idea about focus on the family, that's a pretty good standard. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, almost like that's how society is founded. But but so I was raised in that, and for the first 10 or so years after I left my parents' house, I was under the belief, or probably 5 years or so, but for many years after leaving them, I was under the impression that someone says they're a Christian, woohoo, they're Christian.
Right,
And then I found out afterwards, I'm like, so that might have been true like 100, 150 years ago, maybe.
right. It's
That's
not now.
not true today. And then same thing, even I actually had a friend in one of the Facebook groups that I'm in. Most of the atheists in there were typical keyboard warrior trolls, but there
Yeah,
was one guy that I was actually planning on. I needed to get the money to go travel, but I was actually planning on meeting with him and going traveling with him, across the countryside because he was just a nice dude.
that's awesome.
Unfortunately, he passed away before that would happen, but
I'm sorry to
you've
hear
since
that.
come along and two very different things, even though you're all atheists.
Yeah.
Um,
And one other thing I wanted to throw in before I forgot is that so I got to know Frank Turek, but I really became friends with his IT guy. His IT guy is the greatest IT guy in the world. For any apologists out there, his name is Jorge Gill, and he
he's a
has his
good
own.
guy.
You know Jorge?
Yeah, I know Jorge.
I've seen him rewire a church. I was at an apologetics conference, and their system collapsed on the day of the event. And he went upstairs and rolled up his sleeves, and over 2 hours rewired the whole church. And I just sat there with him and like snacked on the snacks at the church and just watched him work. So he was brilliant. But what he told me was
Yeah,
that on Frank Turek's page, if Frank Turek says, atheists have a unsatisfactory worldview, or the atheism worldview doesn't work, they get a certain amount of hate, or if Islam is this problem, they'll get a certain amount of hate. He said the most hate that they get every single time is when Frank Turek says, this young earth, old earth thing is nothing. This is just an in-house discussion between loving Christians. We're all brothers in Christ. Nothing to see here, folks. Keep this out, keep this. This is all very friendly. We're just announcing that it's not even a big deal. When he does that, the vitriol is just like mountains and mountains, and 17,000 people are like, you're going to hell. Can you read the Bible or not? And he's like, that's where the vitriol is. It's not in, well, it is. There is vitriol in atheism and Muslim, but when it gets out of hand is when Frank is trying to make peace between young earth and old
yeah,
earth.
and
And,
that's yeah.
well, and the reason why I want to bring this up is not
Mhm.
something to claim against Christianity. It's because there's just more Christians. The one thing that you Christians have to deal with that we don't have to deal with is that there's more of you. And if there's going to be more of something, 2 billion of you, then you're going to have more examples of bad stuff. And you'll have more examples of good stuff. But you guys are
But the
going to
bad
be
stuff are the loud and the memorable.
right. And so and you're just going to have more of it. And if there's another dominant religion somehow in 20 years, that there can't possibly be, but if there was in 20 years, they would have this to deal with. So it's just one of
Yeah.
the downsides of being dominant.
No, that's a good point, and that's well, I would add in a I don't think this could be the general description of most societies throughout history. But at least today, I think we do have the combination of being dominant and being and at a societal level being dominantly ignorant.
Yeah.
And I mean, I read a survey they did last year, surveyed Americans. How many books have you read in the last year?
I think you've mentioned this on your page.
Yep. The average person, the average American, read one book or less the
Wow.
entirety of 2023. If you read two books,
Hmm.
which is about 2 pages a day. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Zoom does fun stuff. Hey, if you read two books in the year, you read more books than the average American the entire year.
Wow. That's amazing.
And if you read one book a month, 12 books, you were in like the top 20%.
Wow.
Now,
I would
combine
say
that with, huh?
I would say I probably do one every 2 weeks because when I get a book, I really like to get it. I really like to understand it. So I might read it a couple of times. And then plus I also like to read the books that are assigned to my daughters for their high school. I like
Good.
to too.
I wish
So
more parents would do that.
yeah, well, and I just enjoy them. It's not so much trying to be a good parent. I just really enjoy those books. Like for instance, I don't read their math books with them, so I can't say
I
I'm a
mean,
super loving parent, but I do love the classics. So I love to revisit the classics, and
mhm.
between those two books together, I ended up doing like maybe 2 or 3 books a month.
Yeah, and that's I mean, I read about 300 books a year,
I saw
which
that.
I'm a book guy. I
Yeah,
do not hold that expectation to others.
yeah,
I do think everyone can read more than they're currently reading,
yeah.
and I hold that to myself too. If I could get my attention span under control, I could read far more than I'm currently reading, but there it is.
300 is not
Um,
bad.
huh?
300 is not bad.
Uh,
300 even.
Thank you, but it's that like that's my passion. Some people watch sports while they're doing that, I'm reading.
For
But
me, it's the gym.
yeah, that I do
I
not
mean,
use the gym, and people can tell, and I can tell, and I need to use the gym more.
we
Uh,
all have our things. We all have them. And
yeah,
who's to
we
say who's
we all
right?
have our hobbies, we all have our things, but everyone can read more, and I am a firm believer that everyone can get to the point of reading at least a book a month,
I think so too.
which I think is a reasonable low standard.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, if you can read two or three, if you can read a book a week, I think most people could read a book a week. It would take discipline, it would take time, it would take building up to it, but I think most people could.
Yeah.
If we take on Audible narration time, which is slower than normal reading, most books tend to be 6 to 12 hours long.
Yeah.
And the statistics I've seen are that the average American, I think it's the average person in the world, spends about 7 hours of screen time a week.
Right. Take 2 of those hours and put them
Yep.
towards it. I agree.
And you're finishing a book every 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, I
Just
agree
two
with
of
you.
those hours. So but when we combine that with, and I as a young Earth creationist, it's personal for me when young Earth creationists are doing this. But I also know it's not young Earth creationism as a belief that's causing it. And
Right.
the
It's not.
reason why I say that is because I've seen the same, this is my hill, I will die on it, no matter how ridiculous of a hill it is,
Yeah.
behavior from almost every religious group, or
I've seen it,
at least
I've
that
seen it
are,
from flat Earth people. I've seen it from flat Earth people who aren't religious.
yeah,
I know a flat Earth guy who's like, I don't believe in religion. I think that's ridiculous, but I do understand how measurements work, and I do understand how facts work, and our planet is flat. Uh, and he's going to die on it. And anybody who disagrees with him, he's like, you're brainwashed. I remember being as dumb as you are, and I really hope that you are willing to learn from one day. So yeah, it has nothing to do with religion. It's all human nature.
yeah. It's which I really wish that new atheists and progressive Christians in particular would do, because one of my particular, and I don't know if you've and like, please fact check me on this or disagree if you think I'm off on this. Um, New atheists and progressive Christians both make it their platform that the reason they believe the way they do is because they've studied it and researched it, and they've come to these conclusions. And
20
then
years.
overwhelmingly, in my
Yeah.
experience reading them and talking with them,
Yeah.
when you find out what that research is, it's they saw a meme or a TikTok clip, and they've never pulled up a primary resource. They've never read a scholar that disagrees with them. They've never done any critical thinking, which to me it's and again, this is my anecdotal stuff of what I've seen from them. I
Yeah.
find that highly hypocritical, because like, I'm obviously, I said, so I'm an apologist,
Yeah.
and as an apologist, by that, I'm saying that I believe I have good arguments and reasons for what I believe. That's why when I study progressive Christianity, I'm not going to, well, here's Elisa Childers and she said this, so I'm just going to repeat it. I'm going to, okay, here's Richard Rohr, here's Brian McLaren, here's, all these different people that I'm reading firsthand directly.
Right.
So have you seen that? Do you agree, disagree?
Yeah, in terms of which groups do it, again, I'm going to push back and say just human nature.
Yeah,
I'm even going to give you like the the greatest source for anybody who wants to know why this happens.
Douglas
One,
Adams.
huh?
Douglas Adams.
Well, that's a good example. But it's a book called The Knowledge Illusion, and it came out in 2017. Author's last name is Sloman, and it's called The Knowledge Illusion. And this is
Got
something
it.
that is biological and neurological for all humans. And what it is that we genuinely believe that we know things when in reality we don't know it. But the thing that our brain is saying is that somebody knows it. So it's like you said, a TikTok meme. So if I'm an atheist and I've seen Richard Dawkins and he's like, in 15 seconds, he's like, the science is clear and religion has been demolished, and science is been sure about this for 400 years. I now know that religion has been demolished and science, and I've read 400 years of, how much have you read? 400 years of science. And which sources? Well, 400 years. What part of 400 years don't you understand? Why do you
Yep.
hate science? I'm going to start to panic because I heard Richard Dawkins say 400 years of science. I don't know if he's actually said those words. That is
It's
something that
similar or something, yeah.
yeah, that will happen to anybody. If it's something important to you, you will accept it. You will actually think that you know it. So that's one of the things, like you said, it's intellectually dishonest. It's also self-deceptive in a way that you don't realize you've been deceived. So that's why people get mad because they say, I've done this many years. When I said 20 years, that was Aaron Ra. Did you know that reference?
For 20 years, I've been asking, have you looked the word up in a dictionary?
Aaron Ross streamed that at Eric Hernandez about I think 5 years ago.
Yep.
Eric was arguing Christianity. Aaron Ross was like, I've been doing this for 20 years, 20 years. So that just became sort of a joke.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's a
he's
bad
genuinely
joke.
angry. He really was genuinely angry. He wasn't just being a jerk because in his mind, he's for 20 years, checked the data, point by point, and now he's utterly convinced. But that all falls underneath the knowledge illusion.
Mhm.
You go for the sources that seem to confirm it. You believe that you've researched as much as those sources say, and you're completely into your, I'm going to say bubble, but I think experts have worse of a problem than people uh, who don't really have to deal with this or who choose not to deal with this. Experts, it's even worse because you're surrounded by sources that agree with you, and
Yeah.
mind is just kind of structured to keep confirming it. Now, I know for a fact you read a lot of disconfirming books, so I realize you're agonizing and you're struggling against it. So
It,
I'll give you credit for that. But
well, and I was gonna say, like, not to pump myself up, but legitimately I agree 100% with you because I used to be that way.
yeah,
I used to be like, there is this bias that people tend to have, and it's like that's why I take it so personally that I go and read this stuff. Read primary sources as much as I can. I mean, I've got Dawkins and Hitchens right on the shelf there.
good.
And not to, pump myself up, but there is that difference between um I think I know what I'm talking about, even whether you've been doing it a week or, 20 years.
Mhm.
And I know that I am intentionally taking steps to question what I'm doing, to read other stuff, to question the things I've been hearing. Even I'll take things Elisa Childers says, and I'll take it back and be like, okay, can I back this up? I'll do when I do interviews. I try to be very careful about if I say X, Y, or Z, think back to it of like, okay, do I have a source actively in mind that I can say, here's this survey that was done that says that. Here is this, book that, specifically says that I can point to. And if I don't have that, or if I don't know that I can definitely find it, Like I mentioned the progressive Christian earlier that, wants to kick conservatives off the planet. I don't remember exactly which book it is offhand, but I remember, like I know which series it's in. I can go find it. It'll take me just a couple minutes to figure out which of the books it's in. I
Right.
know I've highlighted it. I know the authors. I can do that.
Yeah.
But there's other things that I've heard, and I've seen especially a lot on Facebook, claims about X, Y, or Z, and I'm like, I'm not going to repeat that until I can take that and until I can verify it, until I can test it. Because I've been guilty of sharing those things before. I mean, I shared Ron Wyatt's golden chariot wheels in the bottom of the Red Sea because I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I've shared myths like that, and I don't like giving false information to people.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. But it is. I'm definitely adding this book both to show notes and to the priority. I've heard about it,
Yeah.
um,
And
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 yeah,
you can look up the author too. Like sometimes people hear about a book from me, and they just don't want to go buy it. But you can go to YouTube, and I think his first name is Philip, and last name is Sloman, and he'll give a talk showing the data, the research,
it.
and he'll include himself. He's like, I'm not saying that scientists don't suffer from this. It's just a human nature
Hmm.
thing. And he says it's because our brains evolved to collaborate. We evolved to think in terms of groups, and we genuinely trust when we're born into a culture, we absorb the culture and we trust that that culture knows what it's talking about. And I'm not saying you're doomed if you're born in an Islamic country, you're born to be Muslim, but statistically speaking, you are very much a product of the surrounding conditions that you
Yeah.
grew up. That's just
Um,
part of us.
I have to both one make sure the right information is out there, but two point out the comedy in this.
Yeah.
You were both right and wrong about the author because
Oh,
there's two authors, and
right.
it's Stephen Sloman. So you got
Still,
that. There
yeah.
goes Zoom
Still,
again.
yeah.
So it's Stephen Sloman. So you got the last name right, and then it's Philip Fernbach. So you got the other name right.
That's right. So
So you
Philip
got
from
both
Philadelphia.
names right for the wrong people.
Yeah, good. And see, and Zoom celebrated that by raising the window, the balloons and saying, atheist,
Yeah, no,
atheist is wrong. Yay!
they Zoom added the thing you can if you do a thumbs up or the peace sign or two peace sign or two thumbs up, it does different things, and I keep
Yeah.
forgetting that it triggers it.
Oh, that I think the timing was perfect because and I'm glad you brought that up. But and Stephen Sloman is the one that gives a lot of TED Talks,
Yeah,
or things like TED Talks. Sometimes it's just lectures, but he'll explain and he'll even show videos. He'll say, "This is what you think you see. This is what you think you know, and here's the reality." And it's
yeah.
very humbling experience.
Yeah, no, and I agree. It's human nature. It's human experience itself,
Mhm.
not religion. Because I mean, I'm fully biased on here, but I know in the apologetics community we are sticklers for going back and fact checking things.
Mhm.
And yet, there's been cases where apologists have repeated myths and rumors and things that, they heard it from this one person and they heard it from this other person. And, they trusted that that person knows what they're talking about, not knowing that that person had heard it from someone else that they trusted, who heard it from some. And so I've seen that happen even in the apologetics world. But I will say there is it, to the defense of apologetics, I do think it does provide the right mindset to more proactively challenge that bias and that unintentional ignorance. Um, but it's not apologetics because of Christianity. It's because of the desire to want to be able to explain why something is right.
Yeah.
And I think you have this as well in your own regard, both in your counterterrorism experience, which it gives you the I can't say this person is a terrorist unless I have this stuff. I can, the fact that I feel like he's a terrorist means absolutely nothing.
Right.
You have to have the evidence. You have to have the stuff behind it,
Right.
and so that type of job trains you for it.
Yeah. In fact, I would say a lot of the stuff we read is people who want to do something and maybe even identify as somebody who will do something, but they don't do anything. So if they're angry and they're bitter and they're talking the talk, but none of their weapons work because they haven't taken them out of storage for 10 years, and they haven't bought any ammunition, and they haven't cleaned the guns, and they haven't even done any target practice or picked a target. Then we have to say, okay, they might just be mentally addicted to the idea rather than actually
Mhm.
doing it. So yeah, in order to really be a terrorist, you have the intention and the capability. And what we've noticed is a lot of people have the intent and even really sincerely believe they have the capability, but aren't demonstrating that they actually have the capability.
Mhm. But you have to have those pieces.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, I'll use one of the more common new atheist claims as an example of Jesus was, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, had 12 disciples, died and rose from the grave. And Mithra was born on December 25th and had 12 disciples, and those memes that go around listing like 15 deities that have it.
Right.
And it fits both aspects of one that you highlighted specifically of shared knowledge,
Yep.
even though the people that are sharing it aren't really
That's right.
questioning it.
But it
Uh,
was on a movie, Bill Maher's Religiosity. That's a
yeah,
official documentary that was released to the
or even
world.
worse, on Zeitgeist.
Yeah. So, I
um,
mean,
but it
hello.
it it points back to the ironic or illustratively to the capability side
Yeah.
of okay, the claims there, the desire is there, the sincerity is there,
Yeah.
but when we go to the primary sources, is that what we find?
Right.
I mean, I heard one progressive Christian a couple months ago talk about how Buddha was born of a virgin. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like what I know about Buddhism. So I went and checked a little bit, and it seems like apparently Buddha's mother had a vision that was much closer to Abraham and Sarah,
Hmm.
where an elephant walked past her and impregnated her, like from her side, and then she gave birth. But then years later is when she actually had Buddha.
Okay.
And so there's this myth that's followed. It wasn't fact checked. It doesn't reflect the primary source, but it reinforces the point. And so we're going to go on ahead and use it.
Right. And I was just thinking of one as you were saying that as one of the atheists. I think it was Richard Carrier who said that Paul was killed and resurrected, and that the Bible has Paul being killed and resurrected, and uh, and then there were atheists for years, and maybe I don't know if I've seen it lately, but I mean atheists for years were like, hey, the Bible has Paul being killed and resurrected. It's in the Bible. Look it up. But if you
And
look
then
it
we
up,
look it up and it's not there.
right? They throw him out into the edge of town, and then I think when when Carey was pushed into that, he was like, well, what they're saying is that if you look at the historical context, it's that he actually died and was resurrected. But that was his source, was the verse that said he was thrown out on the edge of town or something like that. But I mean,
Mhm.
atheists were adamant. They're like, hey, I've know this for a fact. I've researched it. Well, you
Mhm.
heard the Carrier say it back. I mean, this was 15 years ago when historicity was first a thing. Um,
Yeah.
so that kind of talk led to a lot of people genuinely believing it.
Well, and that's why I push so hard when I'm talking with people who um it, when they display the attitude of
Yeah,
I've researched this so much and so this is what it is.
yeah,
I will push hard on describe your research.
yeah. What sources?
Yeah, what sources are you using? Where are you reading this? Where are you getting this from?
Yep.
Because like I said, I'm passionate about going to primary sources, but at least even, you go to something published by Oxford University Press. Okay, at least you've got an academic publisher that hopefully what comes out of it is reasonable,
Yeah.
is well researched, even if it's wrong. Like I highly respect the fact that Richard Carrier has his degree. He also is in a position, and you may laugh at this number actually. According to Richard Carrier's work, there is about a dozen historians or scholars in like historical religious fields that believe Jesus mythicism.
Uh-huh.
There's more scientists at the Discovery Institute that question evolution than there are Jesus mythicists in the comparable fields.
Right.
But I respect the fact that they have that. as far as they're off. I have a lot more respect for Bart Ehrman, except that I have to say he's two-faced, and I don't mean that insultingly. When he's talking about Christianity, you can't trust anything the Bible says. When he's talking about history,
Yeah.
the Bible is, one of the most solid books in history. Um, but I highly respect that these are scholars, that these are experts, that, they've earned their degrees.
Mhm.
And then we still have to check for bias, and we still have to check for, what exactly is going on. On a practical example, if I'm not getting the name mixed up, Candida Moss claimed that there were no Christian creeds prior to about 300 AD,
Uh-huh.
which puts her in a position of arguing that 1 Corinthians 15 was written 200 years after Paul died.
Right. Right. Because that's where the creeds would have come from, right?
Exactly. Like that was all of the creeds quote 1 Corinthians 15, and 1 Corinthians 15 itself is a creed.
Yeah.
Um, but we going back to the responsibility to believe well. Um, I also think one thing we've done, and ironically, I think the last 4 years of medical positions has made people realize this. I'm trying to be careful to avoid the algorithm. Um, that someone is an expert in the qualified field doesn't mean what they're saying is right.
Right. Yeah.
And we as individuals have an obligation to test them as much as we can before we push it.
Yep. I agree. Um, that even reminds me that there's this one scientist that I've just been following religiously. Uh, me using the word religiously. Uh, and his name is Michael Levin, and he's talking about some things that at some point I think apologists and atheists are going to have to highlight. Right now, they're both avoiding this work. But the reason why I trust him is that he's got video of the research. So he's saying that like cells will communicate with each other and they'll have a goal. And once they know the goal, they find a way to the goal, and they'll find different ways to get to the goal. So if you try to obstruct them from reaching the goal, they'll find a way around it. And then when they get to the end of the goal, they stop. So he's like, there's some sort of biochemical energy floating between them that they're able to talk to each other, and they don't know where the goal comes from. So like if an amphibian loses a leg, these cells are like, okay, we're going to put a leg here. And the science is so good now that they can pick up the signal that the cells are telling each other that says put a leg here. And then you can watch the cells do it. So Michael Levin can say that cells are acting like they have a goal, and they're acting like they're making decisions because they can take different routes to it. He can say that, but then if you question him, he'll break out the video and say, okay, well, here's several different times where the frog leg regrew and we blocked it. So then you have no choice but to say, wow, these cells are acting like they have a goal. They find a way around obstacles, and when they reach the goal, they stop. And there's no neurology there. That's all biochemical energy between cells, no neurology. So why is there a plan? How do they know when to stop? How do they know when they've reached an obstacle and they go around it? Where does that come from?
That is,
Nobody knows.
I found him. I see him right now. I'll have to watch some of his videos. That is so intriguing.
Yep. Well,
I
and
know.
I've talked to Christians and atheists about this, and they both don't like it for, because for atheists, we don't know where the plan comes from. And so that would lead apologists to go, oh, well, there's a goal maker. In fact,
It's
I was
intelligent
talking
design.
about this
Yeah.
morning through the idea by Tim Stratton, and he's like, okay, so there's a goal maker. And so now we have biological, well, he wasn't saying that much, but he was like, the evidence of a goal maker. So that's why a lot of apologists don't like it. I mean, that's why a lot of atheists don't like it, because it looks like there's some sort of and there's a plan, there's a blueprint for starting, finding a way there and stopping. That's goal oriented, whether it's really the same way of goals that we do it or not, it's actually happening and they can measure it and show it. And then the Christians don't like it because that's what cancer does too. So cancer is also saying, okay, we're going to find a way to grab this host, take all the resources and make it for us. And we're going to keep growing and just keep advancing ourselves inside this external environment, not realizing that when it succeeds and the host dies, that it's going to die too. And so in that sense, they're like, okay, why would a goal maker come up with the goal to destroy its own environment and then die itself. That doesn't make sense either. So neither scholarly apologists nor scholarly atheists are happy with Michael Levin right now. But
Uh,
the data's right there. So it's something that I think we're all going to have to grapple with.
well, I'm going to break the mold and say I love it, and I think it's a great example. And the reason why I say that is, um, and I'm so backdrop a little bit. I've challenged a particular progressive Christian for a while on on claims he makes about how to translate the Bible.
Yeah.
And I've had interest in languages throughout almost all of my life.
Yeah.
So I'm currently on a 4-year plan for learning different languages. Like, not just I'm using Duolingo and drops every day, and I'm cycling between the 40, 4 dozen languages they have. But this year I'm focusing on modern Hebrew so I can learn how to actually read modern Hebrew. Next year will be modern Greek. The year 3 will be biblical Hebrew and Hindi because I got a
Mhm.
beautiful Tibetan Book of the Dead that is bilingual and I want to read it. And then year 4 will be biblical Greek and Arabic. And then I've got Japanese, Italian, Quranic Arabic, and um, I think Aramaic in the next 4 years. The reason I bring that up is because I'm learning Hebrew right now, and so I can't confirm this as is, but in the CSB Study Bible, I want to say it's the Cultural Background Study Bible. It talks about in Genesis 1, in God said everything was good. And the Study Bible specifies that in the Hebrew, the word for good, tov, is it doesn't necessarily mean perfect. What it means is operating the way it's intended,
Okay.
operating the way it's designed. And so from my Hebrew lessons so far, it seems to match. I'm assuming, it's a credible source. I believe they're accurate. So taking it to Michael Levin's thing, it actually, I can't explain a source for it per se, but it would make sense if cells have the ability. uh, I'm gonna be I'm gonna make Eric Hernandez mad, and I'm gonna say if cells have a soul, um, let's just
I'm
let's go with that
going to
theory for
Eric on
now.
the phone.
Let's go with that theory for now, just for language sake. If cells have a soul
Mhm.
to where they're able to pick a goal and go for it, cancer cells are normal human body cells, except they're corrupted in their purpose, not in their actual feature, as from what I understand, in terms of like, okay, they still operate and move and, propagate,
Right.
but they're corrupted in terms of they're trying to do something that they're not intended to do. And so it would actually make sense to where if good is seeking to operate the way it was intended,
Mhm.
and good cells as created are seeking to accomplish that, then it would make sense that one effect of the fall is cells that are trying to break that, for lack of a better term. So that actually it makes sense, at least on a theoretical level.
Right, and I guess I could see that. And then I would just, for people who have like kids who develop cancer, they would say, why would that happen inside of this, child at 3 years old who's
Hmm.
not even sure how all this works yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of stuff. Uh, and also, if we're going to say cells have a soul, another thing Michael Levin's work is that cells will compete with each other. So like if there's like a cell at the edge of a frog leg, and his job was just going to be like the skin
Hmm.
of the frog, and the leg gets amputated, some cells will go over and grab it and say, we're reprogramming you now. Now you're going to help us be part of the leg. And so it's like they muscle each other out. They muscle each other and kind of force each other to do things. And then some cells are like, okay, I'm going to do this, which is what happens with cancer cells. A cancer cell is it's a cell that says, okay, I'm supposed to be a liver and I'm supposed to be part of this thing, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be my own thing. And then usually what happens is that the other cells say, okay, kill yourself. And they send it the signal to self-destruct. And usually it does, but sometimes they don't. And it's like, nope, I'm gonna do my own thing. And then it doubles they say, we're gonna do our own thing. And now they're thinking like a we. So it's almost like an individual and then a we, and then the tumor is like, then we're a we. and then they start muscling other cells and saying, hey, you're on board with us now. And it really is just a battle of, I want to say, wills. And there's no ultimate goal except for death, except that they don't know it. That tumor cell doesn't realize that if it's successful, it's going to die because it's going to take over the host. The host is going to die, and then the tumor is going to die. So it's all this big, grand, intricate, amazing, wondrous battle for nothing. And for me, I'm like, I don't see how a soul or a goal maker would do all that. And,
Um,
I'm biased.
no, yeah, I'm not gonna, literally argue that cells have a soul, but for
Right.
lack of a better term,
There's
but
definitely a plan. There's definitely a plan.
yeah, well, definitely a plan, but also, um, I love how we hit the rabbit trail of getting to this thing because the way you just described how cancer has a goal, is trying to achieve it, but because it doesn't look at the long-term consequences, doesn't realize that it's self-destructive by nature.
Right.
It's a perfect example of the problem we started with, of the mindset that says, I'm right, everybody else is wrong, and if you don't agree with me, you're the problem.
Yep.
Not you're someone who disagrees with me,
Yep.
because it creates a very cannibalistic mindset where um, everyone will end up being canceled. I mean, I found it so ironic that Brenda Marie Davies of the God is Great channel, I don't know if you're familiar with her,
I
um,
haven't,
she has like or had like 1 million followers on YouTube,
mhm.
got canceled because she happened to do some. I still don't really understand exactly what happened, but it wasn't like she suddenly embraced Trump or anything.
Right.
It was something that it was like, that's what you're going to cancel her over.
Yep.
And she was one of I've seen other Christians call her, one of the nicest on the progressive Christian side. And
Yep.
while she was teaching, she was fully on board with everything that they taught. And I'm like, it's very cannibalistic. She happened to say or do, one thing that was moderately not exactly kosher, and she's gone.
Yeah, it's a very good metaphor because you're right. We can act like cancer cells, and you get enough of us. I would say the Nazi regime was like a cancerous tumor that was taking over the planet. Um, ISIS had like a blip. ISIS had like 2014 and then done. Uh, but
Same
that
with
was
Westboro Baptist.
Yeah, it was rising much faster than we thought. I remember when ISIS, in the field, we were following this in real time. And when ISIS took hold, we're like, they're too small. And like within a month, they were selling T-shirts on Amazon, and people were leaving their homes and like going and being part of this because they genuinely believed that the leader of ISIS was actually real time receiving word from God, and that was exciting for people all over the world. And it was suddenly growing, and fortunately that, I call it a cancer, fortunately was stopped, but it's another thing. Sometimes we can act just like cancer cells. Humans can act just like cancer
Hmm.
cells. And I promise you that the people who were doing it were not like saying, haha, we're evil. They were like, this is righteous. We're doing exactly
Hmm.
what we're doing. Historians are going to love how strong we are. We're telling the hard truth. With that kind of mindset, with the terrorist mindset, it's
Yep.
hard to explain to them that they're doing something dangerous. They think that they're doing absolutely the right thing. And
Yeah.
again, that's why I'm in this line of work, is that I try to say, be careful if you're starting to approach that mindset, that it could be very dangerous. That's one of the main reasons why I do this.
Yeah. Uh, so okay, yeah. So this is my first like interview thing, so I have no idea how to like properly close this out. But it's been great talking with you. But on that, I want to close with a C.S. Lewis quote.
Okay.
And frankly, you probably know what it is. You might
Okay.
even be able to guess it before I start reading. Because it's
Because we know Louis Marcos. You and I know Louis Marcos.
oh
So
yeah, Lewis is amazing.
or
But
Louis,
C.S.
Louis Marcos. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, Marcos is amazing as a modern guy that like we can actually talk to.
Yes.
But I think even he'd agree that we defer to C.S. Lewis because
Okay.
it's C.S. Lewis. Um, but he said in God in the Dock, of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, his cupidity may at some point be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. They
Yeah.
may be more likely to go to heaven, yet at the same time likelier to make a hell of earth. This very kindness stings with intolerable insult. To be cured against one's will and cured of states which we may not regard as disease is to be put on the level of those who have not yet reached the age of reason or those who never will, to be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals.
Yeah, that's a powerful quote. I don't think I've ever heard it before, but it sounds exactly, I'm a big fan of the Ransom trilogy, and that is very, very,
Oh,
uh,
the Christian 1984.
yeah, that quote just ties right in with
Yeah.
that series of novels. But I had not ever heard that exact quote, so I'm glad
Okay.
you read
Well, I'll be sure to send it to you. It's an intrigue. It's from a book I still need to finish,
that.
called God in the Dock, where C.S. Lewis, if I understand correctly, he sets up the scenario of in British because it's not English,
Right.
dock is a legal term of someone on
Okay.
the witness stand,
Okay.
and so the scenario he puts is God on the witness stand,
Okay.
and then works through that in C.S. Lewis style. So I'll send
Nice.
that to you. But this has been fascinating, and seriously, I'm going to get with you after, and in addition to the one book, the Knowledge Illusion, I'd love to talk with you about books on counterterrorism and
Yeah.
anything else you have on that mindset in particular. Because okay, I'm not going to keep going and rabbit trail off into another conversation. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Hit like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And hopefully, we'll be doing this again. So, thank you very much, and have a good something. Have a good day.